Editor Docs here. For reasons we get to early in this episode, we were recording in a different environment than usual. In hindsight, I should have known it would be too echoey. Sorry for the poor audio quality on this one. I did the best I could.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Buddhish. This week we will be recording our 2024 year-end wrap-up, and it'll be a special treat because we will be recording it live and in person.
That's right. Most of the time when we're recording this, I'm in southern U.S., Nick's in northwest U.S., but I've come up here on vacation, and we have finally met for the first time face-to-face. Kind of weird that we did all of this, and you've never seen me before. It's cool.
It's crazy stuff. It's surreal in a good way. 3 years of a podcast, and then 2 years bouncing around on Discord servers, or about 1 year prior
Something
to
like
it.
that.
And yeah, first time meeting. So wonderful stuff.
Yeah, it's been fun. This has been a vacation mostly on my own, but it's real good to finally meet you. And we are here to talk about how 2024 went for us. So let's go.
So to get started, I would say that the YouTube launch was a success. We're caught up now to where YouTube is in step with our weekly Friday uploads. And, when we started doing that, we had, I think, 89 or 90 episodes already out whenever we made that initiative. And so even uploading every day, it took us 3 months to catch up the YouTube to Spotify because YouTube has a limit as to how much you can upload in one day. And because it just didn't make a lot of good sense to upload 10, 15, 20 episodes a day. And so we finally caught up in the fall, and we've been uploading regularly. And we have some listeners on YouTube, so shout out to you guys. We have some fun interactions in the comments on YouTube. I think that we've been uniquely lucky that we haven't had any horrible, hateful, mean comments so far. We've had some weird ones, but we haven't had awful ones. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah. The worst thing that's come out of the YouTube comments so far has been stuff I didn't understand, and whatever. That's everywhere. For the most part, yeah, the YouTube launch was more successful than I was expecting. And I'm glad that you guys are all listening to us.
I'm glad as well. I'm glad that it went well, and I hope that it stays civil and nice. I hope it stays above average for YouTube.
Yeah, but also, we're talking scholarly Buddhism. That's not a realm that draws a whole lot of trolls, So I'm not too worried about that part.
So the next point that we're going to talk about is the Patreon.
Right.
We wanted to have some space on this episode to discuss next steps with the Patreon. We released an announcement saying that we would shut it down until further notice. And I wanted to set aside time early in this episode for us to just kind of freely speak about what our idea, what our vision for the Patreon is in the near future, and where we stand on it personally, and give a little bit more context and a little bit more information about why we shut it down and what our goal is.
Right. So going forward, what we're going to do is direct anybody who would want to give us financial support to instead support some good causes with that money. Basically, right now, I'm not exactly rich, neither of us are, but we don't need that Patreon money as much as other folks do right now. My intention was to switch to a different cause every month or so, somewhere in there. We'll figure that out going forward. But to start with, we're going to direct folks to throw any financial support you would put to us to instead go to the Trevor Project. This is a project that is basically a suicide hotline specifically for folks who are trans and or gender questioning and that kind of thing. They do good work, and that's work that is desperately going to be needed in the near future. I would like to try and help other folks who are going through that situation, and it just didn't seem right at this point. Editing this show takes a lot of time, and I do most of that. So to start with, we were throwing the money at me. Nick and I have talked about a fair share of it, so don't want to go into full details on that. But Like, I was using that money to buy video games. Like, that was my video game budget for a couple of months. And I don't need more video games. Like, I've got, my Steam library has so many good games that I haven't even touched. So it felt wrong to be spending that money on video games when there are greater needs, especially when we're talking about Buddhism, which is like one of the big things is not handling money anyway. So throwing it to something more worthy than me buying like the latest JRPG. Other people need it more right now.
Yeah, and we also had the option of throwing income that we get from Patreon to the Trevor Project ourselves. But the downside to that is that Patreon gets a cut of every transaction that goes on the platform. And so whatever money we got, we would lose roughly 10 to 12% of it before it ever went to the foundation, to the Trevor Project. And so there's no reason to give Patreon that money just for free, for fun. When it comes to kicking all of this money to the Trevor Project or to a nonprofit that helps people in need, it just makes more sense for the transaction to be between you and the foundation rather than taking the extra step of going through us.
Don't get me wrong, I want Patreon to continue existing. I do support multiple people on Patreon, and I have no problem with them taking a cut out of our stuff, but you'd get more money to the people who need it by doing it directly.
Exactly.
So that's what we are going to go forward. And if anybody does do that, like, let us know. I would like to see that and get that little bit of extra impact of like, hey, this is something we got to happen in an indirect way.
Yeah, exactly. I would love to hear about it as well. I'd love to hear if you chose Trevor Project or any other nonprofit that does good work out there. And I think that would be wonderful if you could share that with us. It would make us feel really good, not only about our idea, of course, of shutting down the Patreon, but it just makes us feel good in general that help is being supported.
So special thanks to our 3 patrons, Tanner, Wooly, and Adine. We really appreciate you guys, and thank you for supporting us. It means a lot that people are willing to put money into this kind of project. When we started this, I was like, this is just for us to have something to do on the internet. I was not expecting this to actually turn into anything monetary. There are not a lot of podcasts that can say they've made money. And so we've done that, and that's enough of an achievement that I'm willing to go, hey, job done. If the world stops screaming at everything from every direction, we might bring it back up again later. Charity work needs a lot of help right now.
Yeah, and Patreon being shut down, there's going to be no change in programming. There's going to be no change in release schedules, and there's going to be no change in content. And it'll be the same show as always.
I was doing this 50% to prove I could do it, and 50% because I wanted to learn about Buddhism. The money was never part of the point. Yeah. So, yeah, that's the Patreon update done.
Let's jump to our annual stats, specifically from Spotify. So Spotify does their Spotify Wrapped for anyone who listens on Spotify, but they also do it for their creators. And, you know, as disgusting as the term is, we are content creators.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, what are you going to do? This is content. So.
Yeah, exactly. So we have stats for our content from Spotify specifically, which according to Anchor is not our biggest listener foundation. It's actually like our 3rd or 4th, but interesting stats nonetheless. We have an increase in the raw number of listeners by 67%. We have an increase in streams by 214%, and we have plus 81% followers. So that means that 2024, we grew our base a lot, and that's great. Thank you guys for listening and for streaming and for sharing and for following, getting the show out there to more people. And that's what we wanted, was to get interesting stuff about Buddhism to people on the internet. And we're doing that more and more every year. It makes me very happy.
Yeah, this is more successful than I was ever expecting us to get. So this is a niche of a niche of a niche project. And so good to see that there's an audience for this kind of stuff. Thank you for listening, and we're going to keep it up. So according to these stats, 91% of listeners discovered us this year. So we have a lot of new listeners this year. Like, we passed some kind of threshold at some point this year, and we're getting more listeners, and it's awesome.
Being that it was this year, I'm putting it in my mind, that is with every week uploading. That's 52 episodes ago. Feels like ages ago.
Yeah.
It feels like 10 seasons ago. We don't do seasons, but it feels like 10 seasons ago.
Yeah, but it's just a year.
Yeah, and we've grown a lot, and we're very grateful for that. I was very fascinated by this. Our most popular episode, which was streamed 371% more than the average number of any of our other episodes, was episode 2, Who is the Buddha? The one that we actually just recorded a revisit on not too long ago.
It makes sense to me because it's like an entry point to the religions. Like, okay, who was this guy? Or who is this guy, depending on how you believe. But it's a good starting point, and it's a really common question that you can get a lot of different answers for because of how diverse the sutras are. It's the starting point.
It is, and I hope that it is a good starting point. I have recently gone back and listened to some of our first 10 episodes, from like way back when we first did them. And we have come a long way in terms of scripting and production value. And
yeah.
I'm happy about that. It's very positive to see where we've come.
Yeah, definitely. I had done some similar podcast work in the past, so I had some experience with this, but I have gotten much more skilled with Audacity in the 3 years we've been doing this. And it would be weird if I hadn't, but I have also listened to some earlier episodes, and it's the same feeling when I go back to look at my old writing. Yeah. It's like, looking back at it now, I can only hear things I would do differently, but also that's a good thing because that means we've grown. Exactly. It means we've advanced. And so, 3 years from now, when we listen back to this one, I hope to feel exactly the same way. Going back to past stuff is often that way if with creative work and scholarly work like this, and it's good to go back and see where you were because that gives you a better idea of where you are.
Exactly.
Now, with my old writing, I'm never going to show that publicly to anyone ever because it is cringe as hell. But unfortunately for my ego here, this is out on the internet already, so there's where I was still figuring out how to pace the right pace for the pauses between sentences and all that. I didn't do very well at the start, and I hope I'm doing better now.
I think you are. I think that we're doing a lot better. I think we have much better episode art. We have much better intro and outro music. We have come a long way, and I'm glad to see it.
So we have been streamed in 39 countries. Now, I'll be honest, a couple of those countries might be me jumping around on my VPN. I do that a lot. But still, that is a wide reach.
And it's important that you know that that's 39 new countries. I should have written that
countries.
Down.
Yeah. The script just says country, so that's new. Oh, that's hard to put my head around.
Before this stat, I had the impression from our uploading service that we were streamed in 100 countries or thereabouts. It changes because we might have one single listener out there in Eritrea, and good on you for continuing to listen to the show. We're glad you're here. Right. But 39 new countries. So that means that it's gone up from last year. And that's great. We love to be reaching new audiences, and we love to be an international show.
I hope we do all right as far as respecting the different approaches to Buddhism that comes from these countries. But I'd like to think that this international reach is evidence that we're doing all right. We're a pair of American white dudes, so there's a limit to how far we can go as that goes, but I hope by the standards of American white dudes, we're doing all right. Let us know if we're not.
That's important information.
Oh, yeah.
All right, the next stat. We are a top 10 show for 98 fans. Thank you to you 98 fans in particular. I mean, that's great. We hope that we continue to give you stuff that you love and that keeps us in your top 10 list.
All right, so next let's talk about what's coming up next year a bit.
Yeah, so every year we come up with new types of episodes, new types of discussions to have, keeping it interesting and mixing it up with new content. And so what's going to be the big new thing for next year, for 2025, is going to be expanding the types of stuff that we read and discuss. So basically, other than our regular episodes, we have been doing sutra episodes where we read stuff that is in either the Pali Canon or the Taisho Canon or both. And that excludes basically the last 2,000 years of textual tradition. What we're looking to do now is just start dipping our toes into the 2,000 years of textual tradition. And it's going to be stuff that's extra canonical or non-canonical, but it's still going to be stuff that interests us and deals with topics that we've dealt with in the sutras and keeps things interesting for our discussion of doctrinal topics. We've read enough sutras now that we have a strong foundation in karma, emptiness, impermanence, the life of the Buddha, nirvana, parinirvana, etc. All of these cornerstone doctrines, we very good on those now, and we can start jumping into the more complicated Buddhology stuff or the philosophy stuff, the more complicated commentarial stuff from thinkers such as Vasubandhu, Xuanzang, Kukai, and just many, many, many others. Even modern Buddhist thinkers like Nishida Kitaro, tons and tons of people to read and tons of material to discuss. And so we're going to start expanding into some of that. And I think that's going to be very interesting. That's my bread and butter as a scholar. I don't actually write papers or do a lot of research concerning the sutras themselves. I actually start with stuff other people have written about stuff other people have written about sutras. And so we're kind of walking towards that goalpost to start being on the level with Western scholarship about Buddhism. And we're getting there.
From what little I've seen of him, I'm looking forward to examining some stuff from Joshu. He seems fun.
Yeah, he is a fun guy. The next big update is on the Asian religion series. I'm currently doing series on Hinduism, Confucianism, and Shinto, and Taoism as well. I'm going to expand and I'm going to introduce episodes on an indigenous religion from Tibet called Bon. And I'm also going to introduce Korean shamanism and Jainism. All three of these are very interesting Buddhism adjacent religions that have a very close and strong connection and relationship with Buddhism.
We've seen Jainism come up in the sutras.
Exactly. You can't really talk about Vajrayana Buddhism in a Tibetan context without talking about Tibetan Bon, nor can you talk about Korean Buddhism, like Korean Seong, without talking about Korean shamanism. So we've seen these things come up before, and they're going to get their own dedicated series on the Asian religion series. So look forward to that in the new year.
So next, we're going to talk a bit about some Buddhish stuff. So we do these be more casual and a little bit less edited and uptight about it. And so some stuff we were going to talk about. We had that one episode about tabletop games a while ago. Between now and then, I have actually got Nick into my regular game online. Now Nick has experience from actually doing it to talk about. We're going to be revisiting that for a bit because it seems like you've been having a lot of fun.
I've been having a great time. This is the very first tabletop RPG I've ever played. And one reason why it took so long for you to get me into it was because I was just over here worried, like, I don't know, I've never played D&D before. And then he's got a system that is so like anti-D&D in a lot of ways. And I'm jumping into the deepest end that I possibly could at the beginning stage. Is it going to be too much, etc.?
These characters, like, I'm going to use D&D because that's the role-playing game everybody actually knows. These characters would be equivalent to like a 6th or 7th level Dungeons & Dragons character. Getting Nick's character into things was also a matter of getting him caught up on how the game works fast enough that he can start playing with my regular group who have been at this for over 3 years, over 4 years at this point. There's an onboarding process, but Nick, you did it really well. Like,
thanks.
I would not have guessed that this was your first tabletop experience at all. So you've been doing great. Your character's a lot of fun. The game is on hold a little bit since I'm not at home, but when I get settled down next year, we're going to keep going, and I've got plans. I think you are all going to like them.
Yeah. He has, with his writing, he has surprised us all and he's impressed us all and he's given us amazing character moments. And so we're going to talk more in depth about that in an upcoming Tabletop RPGs Revisited episode, because now I have an insider perspective. I have a character I think is cool, and I'm playing with a group that I think is really cool. Yeah. And I'm playing a story that you're writing in real time that is awesome, in a setting that's awesome.
So we're writing. I'm not the only writer on that. Like, your character is following a deity that we call the Cosmic One. And deity might even not be the right word, because it's basically my setting's version of Buddhism. Studying the sutras has actually made this setting a lot more rich, because I can actually, now that I have seen the sutras, I can kind of imitate that writing style. I think I've done all right on it.
I think you've done a great job.
It's just, tabletop games are great. Everybody, you should play some. It doesn't matter what type. There are so many out there. Like, another thing that's unusual about your experience, Nick, is you started off, and at this point, like, you've been in it for a couple of months, and you have played 3 different systems.
Yeah.
So that is not usually how it goes. Most people get started on D&D and get stuck there for a very long time.
Yeah, possibly even like forever, for their whole tabletop gaming career. Because we have done one-offs, or, things that were supposed to be one-offs but have kind of carried on for a longer time. I've played also Fabula Ultima, and I don't know the name of the system that we're playing right now while Docs gets settled, but it's translated from Japanese.
Editor Docs again. The game Nick's referring to is called something like Gallico, a role-playing game of mecha, dungeons, and planetary exploration. Originally designed by Ikaraya Josuke, published by Rommel Games, and translated by our good friend Little Justices. This translation project is still in progress, so it may be tricky to track this down.
It's very Voltron-centric. Like your characters have mech suits, and the mech suits all have individual health bars, and there's so much to do with like upgrading the mechs, and I can't wait to talk about it in the Buddhish, because that's been just a complete trip. I've had such a good time.
At this point, we are starting to do that Buddhish episode that we were promised, so let's save that for now. More Buddhish stuff going on. I really enjoyed our episode on the Matrix, and so we're going to be doing more of that media analysis stuff in the future. And so one of the first things I wanted to put on that list is a little indie game called Way of the Passive Fist. It is a game where you are playing a character whose fighting style is basically all defense until his opponent is gassed out and then just pushes them over. The pun is pacifist. Yeah. So it is a game where it's all defense. And if I'm in a video game or that kind of thing, the first character I usually make is going to be how tough can this character be. And so Way of the Pacifist really fulfills that fantasy. And also it might have some ideas about Buddhist nonviolence that we can talk about in there. So we're going to talk about that as well.
Yeah, I haven't played that before, and I'm excited to really discuss how nonviolence functions in that game, but then also, in other games and other media in general. We're also going to, at some point, watch and discuss Buddhism and Groundhog Day with Bill Murray. That's a very interesting one because the premise is, of course, he keeps waking up every morning and it's Groundhog Day again. And he has to grapple with that and figure out what to do, how to live, how to get out of that cycle, etc. And you can see that that's in some ways analogous to the cycle of samsara, and how one must figure out how to get by in it and then figure out how to get out of it.
We're also going to talk about some media that doesn't do Buddhism very well. So I've never seen the film, but when Nick recommended it, he was talking about Little Buddha as a problematic film. And I think it's important for us to, in any media analysis situation, you should also analyze bad media or media that does things wrong.
And Little Buddha is an example of not something that's malicious and not something that's willfully incorrect, willfully misrepresentative of the subject matter, but it is something that's just weak. For example, the main character, who is supposed to be a Siddhartha Gautama character, is casted for Keanu Reeves, and he actually is in kind of like quasi brown face for the whole movie. It's just strange in that regard. It's strange to watch him be in brown face for that whole movie, especially like during the part of his career when he was doing a bunch of movies that had Christian overtones, like Constantine and The Devil's Advocate and others. So we're going to analyze that movie not only as problematic Buddhism media that's been whitewashed, but also in the context of Keanu Reeves' character, his career with like The Matrix and those other movies I mentioned, which are very different from Little Buddha. The next big update for 2025 is that from the end of March until the middle of May, I will be away in Japan, unable to record, unfortunately. I will be on the Shikoku pilgrimage. So we've talked about this on the show before. This is a 750-mile pilgrimage that circumnavigates the southernmost island of the main 4 islands of Japan called Shikoku. And this is a pilgrimage where you visit 88 temples, which were allegedly founded and or visited by Kukai during his historical life in the 9th century. And so that's going to be a very, very large, huge trip for me. I will do it all on foot, and, you know, I'll have the full outfit. So we talked about on the episode on pilgrimages that for the Shikoku pilgrimage, people put on a white robe, and they put on a sort of thing around their neck that denotes what temple they're affiliated with at home, and they carry a staff with a bell on it. Whenever you enter an inn or a temple, the person at the temple greets the staff first and then greets you, because the staff is supposed to be sort of like Kukai walking with you. Very interesting stuff. I will be going on that pilgrimage next year, and at the end, there will be a self-published English and Japanese travelogue that I will write with photos and with entries for each of the 88 temples. And it's impossible to not visit, you know, some of the 20 associated Betkaku sites. These are just associated temples and shrines that are like sometimes, you know, next door to the temple that you're visiting. And so, you know, you're just going to hit it on the way. Some of them are really, really remote. You have to walk like a mile or 2 into the woods to find it, but some of them are next door. And so I will be doing entries for each day, each temple, and some of these Betkaku sites. And I'll be releasing the travel diary when it's done in English and in Japanese to the Bright on Buddhism social media. And of course, there will no doubt be plenty of other content afterwards that is, you know, related to this big trip, because this is a massive, massive thing. It's going to take 50 days, and I'm going to stay at a different inn or a different temple every night, and I will have to buy new shoes before I go, naturally, and I probably will have to retire those shoes afterwards. I don't think most shoes are rated for 750 miles of walking, so that'll be a huge, massive trip, but I'm very excited about it, and I can't wait to share everything I learn and experience along the way once I get back.
Sounds very fun, and we will definitely point it out once we get there. Like on the show, we will point it out where you can find those. I'm looking forward to reading that. That sounds fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a good time, and I think that it will be, you know, it might have to be the first hiatus that Bright on Buddhism has ever taken.
Well, we'll see when we get there. I have a couple of ideas on how that might not be. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. And but if it is, you know, it's well worth it for our first one, right?
Yeah.
It's a good occasion for it.
Yeah, I think a Buddhist pilgrimage is a very good reason to put a Buddhist podcast on hold for a bit. So, yeah we'll see when it's closer to time. There's a whole lot of stuff that's going to be changing between now and then, in my life at least. So, can't really say how things are going to go in May, but, you know, if we can, we'll put more episodes out. And if we can't, oh well, I mean, a 3-year streak of, you know, hitting every Friday is better than most podcasts do.
All right. So that has been our 2024 wrap up and our, you know, vision for 2025. Once again, thank you everybody who listened to us. We're very grateful that you continue to engage with the show and get something out of it. We get a lot out of making it.
Yeah. I'm still enjoying making this show, and that's not usually the way things go for a 3-year-long project. So, like, this has been wildly successful by my standards, and I too appreciate all of you guys listening. So, thank you very much.
My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and the voice of Hearer.
And I'm Docs, editor, question asker, and voice of Hermit.
And this has been Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have any questions that you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment, review, or subscribing. You can also reach us by email at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you.